In 1946, in the icy stone auditorium of the Nuremberg prison camp, white light spilled across the faces of former German generals. The soft hum of a tape recorder echoed in the dense stillness. When asked about the defeat on the Western Front, a staff officer replied tersely, "We did not lose on the battlefield, we lost on the supply lines." That statement marked the beginning of a cognitive excavation. Inside the captured files from East Prussia, a report dated August 19, 1944, by General Alfred Jodl, then Chief of Operations of the Nazi German General Staff, was discovered. According to the transcript, Jodl opened the morning meeting that day at the Wehrmacht headquarters in Rastenburg. He read a bulletin from the Normandy front. The American forces have advanced over 400 miles eastward to the Seine region. He paused and smirked. The officers around the table nodded, believing Patton's offensive had gone too far. A logistics colonel remarked, "No army can maintain that pace for more than 2 days unless they burn up their entire fuel supply." According to Staff Memo number 130, 6/44, the Wehrmacht concluded that the Americans had outpaced their supply lines and would be forced to halt within 48 hours. To Jodl, this was a law of physics, not a conjecture. At the time, the Wehrmacht still believed in the lessons of the Barbarossa campaign. According to statistics in the files of the German Army Transportation Office, in 1941, 80% of German logistics still relied on horse-drawn wagons, with only 20% being mechanized. German truck convoys had been forced to halt for weeks in the Russian mud, and this was accepted as a universal rule. The farther the distance, the deader the logistics. Jodl applied the same formula to his new enemy. By calculation, an armoured division consumed approximately 150,000 gallons of fuel per day while on the move. Patton commanded 12 divisions, meaning over 12,000 tons of supplies needed to be transported each day. With the rear lines located 400 miles behind, they believed the Americans had walked into a trap without a single shot being fired. In the command room in East Prussia, no one disagreed. Weather reports, bridge conditions, and the capacity of the Cherbourg port were all presented as evidence. The logistics maps were crisscrossed with red lines, stretching endlessly from the Normandy coast to Le Mans, where Patton's Third Army was crossing the Loire River. No transportation system in the world could withstand that level of intensity, Jodl concluded. He was so certain that he sent a cable to the Western Command. The enemy will pause within 2 days to resupply. That is the moment to counterattack. Inside the damp wooden building, with the smell of cigarette smoke and ink mingling in the air, faith in technical victory remained intact. But on that same day, in Cherbourg, on the other side of the front, a completely different picture was unfolding. According to the Allied Service Command report dated August 19, 1944, the fuel depots at the port held only 3 days' supply. Over 70% of rail convoys were stalled due to the unrecovered French railway infrastructure. The main port was jammed with trucks, artillery shells, and fuel drums. Colonel George Q. Lynn, head of regional supply, wrote in his diary, "We are swallowing more than we can digest." It was a real situation, a serious logistical bottleneck, not far from what the Germans had predicted. At Allied Logistics headquarters in Le Mans, American officers called an emergency meeting. The command room was cramped, the temperature was above 30 degrees Celsius, and maps covered the walls. Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayres of the Army Transportation Service was called in. When officers presented the numbers on fuel consumption and marching speed, he was silent for a few seconds before saying, "If we cannot supply by rail, we will do it by road. Not by week, but by hour." That idea was initially seen as madness. According to logistical regulations at the time, transport convoys were not allowed to run at night, could not use headlights, had to stop for scheduled rests, and were never to exceed a radius of 250 miles. Ayres intended to break all of that. The meeting transcript still records his words. "We'll create a highway that never sleeps. The lifeline, a one-way highway stretching from Cherbourg to the front lines, where each truck would run 20 hours a day, stopping only for fuel or tire changes." The idea was submitted to superiors that night. On August 20th, the proposal was named the Red Ball Express, using a U.S. railroad term for shipments of absolute priority. When Eisenhower read the 2-page report, he nodded. The order was signed that same day. 140 transportation units, 6,000 GMC trucks, 23,000 drivers. Mobilization began. No one in the room knew they were launching a logistics revolution that would change the nature of warfare. According to Eisenhower's memoir, published in 1948, it was a decision that broke every rule, but if we had followed the rules, we would have lost. In the first few days, American forces operated in near-experimental conditions. Roads were bomb-damaged, temporary bridges were incomplete, and the fuel system was unstable. Yet the first convoys still rolled out of Cherbourg, carrying 105mm shells, aviation gasoline, rations, and mechanical parts. In East Prussia, Jodl continued reading frontline bulletins. The Luftwaffe report dated August 22 stated, "The enemy is still moving eastward, with no signs of stopping." Jodl waved it off, claiming it was British intelligence exaggeration. He still believed in his formula. By the end of the month, the Wehrmacht realized the Americans were not slowing down, they were accelerating. According to the 9th Air Force's statistics from August 28, Patton's armoured divisions had advanced an average of 40 miles per day, twice the limit the Germans had once defined as maximum physical capacity. The difference between the two sides lies in mindset. Germany believed that war was an optimization problem, everything governed by quantitative limits. The United States viewed war as a test of production capacity, an industrial experiment. The Wehrmacht saved every gallon and every tire. The Americans overproduced to absorb losses. One side measured with precision, the other by sheer volume. When the Wehrmacht handbook said, "Do not waste ammunition," Patton was urging, "Fire until it's gone." At Nuremberg after the war, during a hearing on the French campaign, a German officer was asked about the Red Ball Express. He replied slowly, "We could not understand how they kept a convoy hundreds of kilometers long running all night with headlights on, without fear of attack." American military historian Charles B. MacDonald, who was in the room, wrote in his notebook, "When he said that, the light from the window hit his pale face, and I realized that in that moment, an old military knowledge system was collapsing." According to records from the U.S. Logistics Office, by August 26, 1944, 5,958 GMC CCKW trucks had been assembled into 140 transport companies. 23,000 drivers were trained within 48 hours, 75% of them African-American troops. They were ordered to depart before dawn, heading for Le Mans. At the same time, in East Prussia headquarters, Jodl was still updating battlefield maps, red-penning areas marked "enemy undersupplied." But in reality, the lifeline was already forming. The contrast between the two command rooms reflected two worlds. On one side was an aging war machine, believing in immutable laws. On the other, an industrial nation willing to burn past its limits. In the coming days, the numbers in Jodl's notebook would become meaningless. Patton did not stop, he sped up. And in East Prussia, they still believed the enemy had run out of fuel. When the documentary film about the Red Ball Express was screened at the Pentagon in 1945, in a darkened auditorium, the sound of engines mixed with the narrator's voice, they said it couldn't be done. But the trucks kept rolling. That line echoed like a verdict on the entire mindset of old warfare, and in the silence of the Nuremberg room, after the final admission, one could hear the pen signing the minutes. A chapter of war closed with a simple paradox. The generals who once scoffed at American logistics lost because of what they dismissed, and in that silence the Luftwaffe died. In August of 1944, as the fighting in Western Europe reached a pace that even the most seasoned Wehrmacht generals could not have imagined, maps covered every inch of the tables at OB West headquarters. A red line marked the position of Patton's Third Army, which had advanced over 400 miles from the beaches of Normandy. In a room thick with cigarette smoke, General Siegfried Westphal, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal von Rundstedt, ended his report with a short sentence. "They'll stop within 48 hours." According to the report dated August 20th, 1944, O.B. West concluded that the American forces had reached a physical limit. Every analysis confirmed the same thing. No army could advance 400 miles with its entire logistical system still based on the coast. An officer in Westphal's analysis group calculated, for every gallon of fuel they burn another gallon just to get it to the front. For minds trained in the German military academy, that was an insurmountable paradox. The General Staff collectively predicted, within 2 days, the American front will freeze along the Seine. The room fell silent. Everyone believed in the mathematics of war. In reports sent back to Rastenburg, Westphal added a remark he would later call the greatest mistake of my life. Even with unlimited trucks, they cannot sustain such an advance. That statement reflected an absolute faith in classical logistics, the idea that the speed of an offensive is inversely proportional to the ability to supply it. General Alfred Jodl at the General Staff in East Prussia reread the report and nodded. In his personal notebook, he scribbled in the margins 2 words, absolute physics. At the same time, 250 miles to the southwest, an emergency meeting was underway in Le Mans, where the Allied Logistics Corps had set up a temporary headquarters. The command room was sweltering, the noise of electric fans mixing with the metallic scrape of chairs as officers moved about. Lieutenant Colonel Loren Ayers, transportation officer of the Supply Corps, entered with a document less than 10 pages thick. He presented it to the command group chaired by General John C. H. Lee. Outside the windows, convoys of GMC trucks packed the yard, their drivers waiting for orders. According to the meeting minutes, Ayers spoke slowly. If we stick to the current rules, we will stop. If we want to keep moving, we have to rewrite the rules. The plan he proposed silenced the room. Instead of using the tiered logistics system ports, intermediate depots, railways, field warehouses, Ayers proposed creating a living highway from Cherbourg to the front lines, more than 700 miles long, operating 24 hours a day. All trucks would move in one direction, with no stops, only brief halts for refueling. When someone asked, "This has never been tried before?" Ayers replied, "Then let's be the first." When he mentioned the name Red Ball Express, taken from a term in American railroads for express cargo runs, many officers laughed. A British colonel reminded him, "At night, headlights mean suicide." Ayers replied succinctly, "Speed will be our camouflage." According to notes from the 9th Air Force, the Americans accepted the risk of revealing their position, viewing it as the price for maintaining momentum. That idea was later called by Eisenhower a calculated violation of doctrine. On August 21, 1944, Ayers' proposal was forwarded to the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Just 24 hours later, Eisenhower signed the approval order. Under Order Number 187, Sierra Charlie, he authorized the mobilization of 140 truck companies, equivalent to 5,958 GMC CCKW vehicles, the deployment of 23,000 drivers, and the right to operate 20 hours per day. No precedent in European military history had ever permitted a logistical operation of such scale. Eisenhower approved it with a margin note, "If this fails, we will have lost nothing but fuel. If it works, we will change the war." This decision was not just a military order, but also a political act. Advisers warned him that if the Red Ball Express failed, the entire Western Front could be paralyzed. But Eisenhower understood that stopping was the true disaster. He once said in a staff meeting, "We can afford the risk of chaos. We cannot afford the risk of paralysis." When the order was signed, it was said that he folded the file and quietly told General Patton, "Let's see if your trucks can outrun our fears." According to records from the U.S. Logistics Corps, deployment began on the night of August 22nd. Thousands of drivers were mobilized, most of them black soldiers from quartermaster units. Within 36 hours, over 90% of the trucks had assembled. Command constructed temporary fuel points every 25 miles and mobile maintenance stations every 50 miles. The route was marked by red painted signs with the symbol of a round ball, the Red Ball. Meanwhile, at OB West, Westphal still believed in his forecast. On the night of August 23rd, he wrote in his diary, "The enemy has gone too far, too fast. Their fuel is running out." Intelligence from the front reported that the Americans were slowing down to resupply. In reality, it was the brief stillness before the storm. According to reports from the 12th Army Group, just 48 hours later, the first convoys of the Red Ball Express departed from Cherbourg, carrying over 12,500 tons of ammunition, fuel, and rations each day. Scenes at the American logistics depots were described in the diary of Lieutenant William Carter. The depots looked like steel rivers. Thousands of trucks lined up for miles, drivers eating and sleeping in their cabins. Headlights pierced the French night, forming a stream of light connecting the coast to the front. The whole system operated 20 hours a day, each convoy spaced 5 minutes apart, with an average speed of 35 miles per hour. German observers from afar thought the enemy had lost control, but in truth, they were witnessing a new form of warfare, industrial warfare. At the German General Staff, reconnaissance reports from the Luftwaffe came in continuously. On August 25th, one Luftwaffe unit noted, "Convoy of lights visible for 20 kilometers, moving east. No blackout, no dispersion." The German officers were confused. One exclaimed, "They are inviting bombing," but that night there was no attack. A light rain fell, the clouds were low, and the Luftwaffe had no fuel left for a major sortie. And in that silence, the Luftwaffe died. According to the Quartermaster Corps, in the first week from August 25th to 31st, 1944, the Red Ball Express transported 89,939 tons of supplies, an average of 12,848 tons per day. A logistics system born overnight had immediately surpassed the efficiency of rail transport. For Eisenhower, that number was not just data. It was validation that his gamble had paid off. At the front, Patton knew there was a river of steel flowing behind him. He wired headquarters. "Fuel arriving faster than we can burn it." The speed of the campaign exceeded every projection. At OB West, Westphal realized his maps were outdated. When the final report for August was submitted, the old general sat silent for minutes. It was said he only spoke one sentence. "The Americans have rewritten the laws of motion." The difference between the two sides was no longer about manpower or firepower, it was about how they saw the world. The Wehrmacht believed in limits, while America believed that limits could be broken. As Colonel Robert Little, one of the Red Ball commanders, put it, "We didn't fight the Germans with tanks, we fought them with trucks." From Le Mans to Paris, from Cherbourg to the Meuse River, the Red Ball Express turned all of northern France into a war highway. And as the GMCs rolled through each shattered village, the sound of their engines was the answer to every pessimistic report from East Prussia to OB West. Across the border, German troops still believed the enemy was running out of fuel, but when they heard the rumble of thousands of engines stretching to the horizon, that belief began to crack. The numbers they once viewed as constants had been erased by a reality rolling forward. In war, sometimes the victor is not the one with the right formula, but the one willing to burn the formula down. On the morning of August 26, 1944, the port area of Cherbourg lay under a thin layer of mist, and before the sun had fully risen, the roar of engines erupted in unison. Seen from a distance, the port resembled a steel beehive. 5,958 GMC CCKW trucks trailed one another on the damp roads, headlights forming continuous beams pointing southward. More than 140 transport companies were mobilized simultaneously, totaling 23,000 drivers, 75% of whom were African American U.S. soldiers, ordered to move toward Chartres. A British officer observing the scene wrote in his journal, "It looked like a moving city." The GMC deuce-and-a-half trucks, 2.5-ton vehicles, considered the backbone of American logistics, were fully loaded with fuel, artillery shells, food, and mechanical components. According to the Quartermaster Corps report, each truck carried an average of 5 tons of cargo, with some overloaded up to 7 tons. The first convoy, led by Captain Charles W. Thorne, departed at 4:45 a.m., carrying 105mm artillery shells for Patton's 4th Armoured Division. The signal horn blared, and thousands of engines roared to life at once, shaking the ground. From that moment, the Red Ball Express was officially ignited. The route's structure had been redrawn within the previous 36 hours. 2 main roads ran parallel from Cherbourg to Chartres, then branched toward Paris and Le Mans. The outbound route was designated the Main Supply Route, MSR, and the return path was labeled the Return Route, RR. In theory, it was a 350-mile one-way highway, but in reality, it was like a river of machines flowing non-stop. Convoys departed every 5 minutes, each consisting of roughly 67 trucks. The regulated average speed was 35 miles per hour, though many drivers pushed 40 to meet turnaround times. Under the new rules, all prior logistics protocols were discarded. There were no official rest periods, no meal stops, no refueling queues. Fuel stations were positioned every 25 miles, and mobile maintenance units were placed every 50 miles. A team of mechanics equipped with cranes, compressors, and spare parts stood ready to replace an engine right on the roadside within 45 minutes. According to the 9th Air Force report, the average vehicle breakdown rate was 30% per day, but the system maintained its rhythm due to the constant availability of backup trucks. It was the first model of redundancy logistics in modern military history. What stood out most was that the Red Ball Express did not follow blackout regulations rules banning the use of lights at night. According to Allied Command Document No. 47A, Eisenhower personally ordered, "Headlights on, no stops, no fear." The entire route was lit throughout the night, the light reflecting off the wet pavement, turning northern France into a moving ribbon of illumination. A French officer described, "From the hilltop you could see America moving by the light." Oh, the unorthodox nature of the system even surprised veteran American officers. Colonel Charles O. Thrasher, head of the advanced section of the communication zone, initially objected, believing, "It is impossible to control the traffic of 6,000 vehicles per day on the same axis." But after only 48 hours, he had to concede its overwhelming effectiveness. By bypassing administrative procedures, the Red Ball Express operated more like a production line than a transport fleet. Broken-down trucks were pushed to the roadside, cargo transferred to other vehicles, no run was allowed to be delayed. On the other side, the Germans began noticing something unusual. The Luftwaffe report dated August 28, 1944, stated, "Continuous convoy of lights, visible for 20 kilometers. No spacing, no blackout." Reconnaissance officer Alfred Kramer of Aufklärung Unit 116 radioed back to Army Group B command. "Enemy moves regardless of day or night, as if unafraid of detection." Analysts believed the Americans had lost discipline or were growing desperate, but as they saw convoys stretching for tens of kilometers moving steadily, that theory was gradually dismissed. General Edgar Feutinger, commander of the 21st Panzer Division, personally witnessed this scene from a high point near Argenton. In his report to OB West, he wrote, "They have turned war into an assembly line. This is no longer logistics, this is industry." That quote was cited in his interrogation file from 1946 in Frankfurt, when he was asked about the causes of defeat. He added, "We fought with soldiers, they fought with factories." According to U.S. Logistics Department statistics, during the first week from August 25th to 31st, 1944, the Red Ball Express transported 89,939 tons of goods, an average of 12,848 tons per day. That figure was over 4 times the limit German generals had once calculated as unbreakable. During that same period, the system consumed approximately 300,000 gallons of fuel per day for its own operation, more than what was allocated to an entire German army group. Yet that flow of fuel was never interrupted. Patton received his first report from the logistics office on the morning of September 1, 1944. He smiled and wrote in his diary, "We're moving faster than fuel can burn." His Third Army had advanced an average of 40 to 60 miles per day, a pace the Wehrmacht had deemed impossible. The coordination between front lines and rear logistics reached unprecedented levels. When artillery units requested 105mm shells, the Red Ball convoys were already arriving before the official requisitions were even submitted. On the German side, the flood of reports threw the General Staff into disarray. On August 30th, an emergency meeting was convened at OB West. Westphal held a reconnaissance bulletin that read, "Enemy convoys operate under full lights, 24 hours, 20 miles visible range." He muttered, "This defies every logistics manual." When a young officer suggested attacking the convoys with night air raids, Westphal replied, "With what? The Luftwaffe is out of fuel." Oh. According to records from the Wehrmacht logistics archive, at that point, Germany had only 50,000 gallons of fuel in reserve for the entire Western European front. Meanwhile, the Red Ball Express alone consumed 6 times that amount each day. Another German officer recorded his impression while observing, "We did not hear trucks, we heard the sound of an industrial nation." By the end of August, Allied intelligence began to recognize the psychological effect of the Red Ball Express. French civilians along the route described the convoys as rivers of light. Children ran alongside, waving, and drivers tossed down candy and cigarettes. According to a civil report from the Normandy region, over 1,000 trucks per hour passed through the same stretch of road each night. More than just transportation, the Red Ball Express became a symbol of confidence, proof that the Allies could not be stopped. From post-war Nuremberg, during a documentary screening for detained German officers, footage of blazing convoys piercing the night was projected onto the wall. One man murmured, "We underestimated them." The light from the projector shone across his worn face, glinting through a haze of cigarette smoke, casting a dim glow across the room. Outside, rain tapped lightly on the windows. In the recording, the narrator's voice rang clearly. Between Cherbourg and Chartres, 6,000 trucks made the impossible routine. When the machine started, America redefined logistics. No longer a supporting concept in war, the Red Ball Express became the war itself. Every turning wheel was a unit of speed, every gallon of fuel, a unit of belief. In the first 2 weeks, the Germans kept searching for explanations. But every logistics theory they had collapsed under the pressure rolling in from the west. They had predicted the enemy would stop within 48 hours, but instead of stopping, the Americans turned those 48 hours into the ignition point of an unstoppable march. As the final night of August fell, the convoys kept rolling, headlights cutting through fog and rain. According to statistics, at any given moment, at least 5,000 vehicles were moving simultaneously along the route. It was no longer a transport campaign, but the mechanical pulse of a civilization on the move. And in the shimmering light of thousands of beams, all of Germany understood that what they faced was not merely an army, but an entire national machine advancing toward them. In September of 1944, across the skies of France, the smoke from the Red Ball Express convoys blended with the morning mist like a continuous flow. Each day, thousands of GMC CCKW trucks still thundered along the same road, creating the sound German soldiers called the sound of endless metal. Inside the command room of OB West, German generals began to realize they were no longer just facing an army, they were facing an armed industrial power. According to the Wehrmacht Logistics Command report dated September 2, 1944, each German armoured division was allocated an average of 20,000 gallons of fuel per day, while the Red Ball Express consumed 300,000 gallons per day just to operate. And yet, the system never stopped. In one memorandum, General Westphal exclaimed, "We are fighting men who do not understand exhaustion." On the other side, the U.S. Logistics Corps did not consider that wasteful, but strategic. According to official statistics from the Quartermaster Corps, the average breakdown rate on the Red Ball Express line was 30% per day. In conventional warfare, that figure would mean disaster. But America used a different calculation. For every 10 broken trucks, 10 new ones arrived at Cherbourg, unloaded from Liberty ships, and immediately joined the convoy. An internal Allied Service Command report stated, "We replace faster than we break." That was the new formula of war, not optimization, but saturation. The Wehrmacht looked at those numbers and called them irrational waste. But in the philosophy of American industrial warfare, everything could be replaced through production. When a GMC truck burned, it was dragged to the roadside, its engine salvaged, its frame reused, and even the tires repurposed for the next vehicle. Maintenance officer Frank Morris wrote in his memoir, "We built our success from the wreckage of yesterday. At each field maintenance station, there were at least 500 spare engines, ready to be swapped in 45 minutes. The Germans called it madness, but the Americans called it pre-calculated attrition. While the Wehrmacht struggled with fuel shortages, the Americans had already prepared an engineering feat unknown to the Germans. Operation Pluto, short for Pipeline Under the Ocean. Since early 1944, British and American engineers had secretly deployed an underwater pipeline system from the Isle of Wight to Cherbourg, stretching 130 kilometers, with the capacity to pump 700,000 gallons of gasoline per day onto the continent. The entire project was completed in absolute secrecy. According to post-war reports from the German Intelligence Bureau, they never detected any signs of this system. Thanks to Operation Pluto, the Red Ball Express did not rely entirely on seaborne supply or floating depots. Pumping stations were set up every 25 miles along the route, allowing trucks to refuel within 10 minutes without returning to the rear. Colonel Robert Little, commander of the Western Route, described it. "It was a river of fuel flowing under our trucks. This allowed an average speed of 35 miles per hour to be maintained 24 hours a day, despite losses and fatigue." From the German perspective, it was insanity. For them, war was calculated in savings, saving fuel, saving ammunition, saving manpower. They designed 57-ton Tiger tanks that burned over 3 gallons per mile, but only managed to produce 1,300 units during the entire war. In contrast, America produced over 500,000 GMC trucks, 49,000 Sherman tanks, and 276,000 aircraft. Those numbers far exceeded any European standard, turning production into a weapon more powerful than guns. This difference was most evident in the field of engineering. During the operation of the Red Ball Express, U.S. Army engineers constructed 40 new bridges, built 15 fuel depots, 26 repair stations, and 8 encampments along the route. One of the most remarkable feats was the Monty Bridge over the Orne River. The Wehrmacht had destroyed it, estimating the enemy would need at least 6 weeks to restore it. But American engineers completed a temporary bridge in 14 hours, strong enough to carry continuous 7-ton truck convoys. The Engineer Corps report dated September 10, 1944 recorded. Bridge completed at 4:15 hours. Convoys resumed at 05:00. Just 45 minutes after the structure was completed, the Red Ball Express was back in operation. The American method followed no European engineering protocol. No meetings, no waiting for finalized blueprints, only immediate construction on site with scavenged materials. One engineer recalled, "We built with what we had, not what we wished for." Meanwhile, the Wehrmacht took an average of 21 days to plan a new supply route. From approval to surveying to material authorization, everything was constrained by a rigid command system. That difference meant their logistics speed was always at least 10 times slower than the Americans. While the Germans were debating in the command room, the Americans had already rolled out their trucks. A German officer captured at Rouen recounted, "We planned for 3 weeks. They deployed in 2 days." According to Allied Command's report in September 1944, when the main Red Ball route became overloaded, the US immediately opened new auxiliary lines: Green Diamond, linking Rouen to Paris, White Ball, running from Cherbourg to transfer zones, and Red Lion from Bayeux to Brussels. Each new route was opened within 48 hours, without waiting for authorization. General John C. H. Lee called it logistics improvisation at its peak. This method erased all limits. If a road was blocked, they made a new one. If a bridge collapsed, they rebuilt it overnight. In Berlin, the German Ministry of Propaganda ordered the press to describe the Red Ball Express as capitalist excess. But in internal reports, the Wehrmacht was forced to admit that the American logistics system had exceeded their capacity to comprehend. A document dated September 12, 1944 stated, "They consume 10 times more than we do, but move 10 times faster." It was a paradox the German military could not solve, because they had been taught that war was the art of optimization, while America had turned it into the technology of surplus. The psychological impact of this imbalance reached every soldier. German troops saw enemy convoys running day and night, heard the drone of engines from afar, and felt surrounded by an unstoppable force. According to prisoner Hans von Luck, "We had the feeling they never needed to stop, as if America could pour an entire ocean into their trucks." For the Americans, that feeling became conviction. They knew that behind them was an endless production machine, ready to replace whatever was lost. By the end of September, the Red Ball Express had delivered a total of 412,193 tons of goods in 82 days of operation, covering the equivalent of 122 million ton-miles. Those numbers rendered every calculation by the Wehrmacht meaningless. According to German military historian Franz Halder in his 1950 report, "They defeated us with logistics, not strategy." On the map of war, America moved not only with soldiers and tanks, but with numbers, output, capacity, replacement rates. In industrial warfare, it was the ability to accept waste that became the weapon. The Germans called it waste, the Americans called it production freedom. And as the Red Ball Express convoys kept rolling through the rainy nights of September, their headlights reflecting off roads slick with oil and mud, that light revealed a truth every European strategist was forced to acknowledge. In the industrial age, victory belongs to the one who can waste the most and still not run out. In early September of 1944, the Western European front witnessed a phenomenon military observers referred to as supra-limit speed warfare. The Red Ball Express convoys had driven General Patton's march past every logistical theory ever taught at European military academies. A report from the 12th Army Group stated, "No army in history has ever moved this far, this fast, while fully supplied. It marked a fundamental shift in modern warfare, when logistics no longer followed the army but ran parallel to it, even ahead of it." On September 1, 1944, Patton's 4th Armoured Division advanced 67 miles in 24 hours, shattering all German defensive lines along the Marne River. 105mm shells arrived at the front before the tanks did. A report from Battery 2, 22nd Regiment noted, "Ammunition arrived before we ran out of targets." That had never happened before. War was now led not by artillery but by convoys of trucks. General Patton looked at the map and told his aide, "If they supply me, I won't stop." That statement was recorded in his journal on September 3, 1944, along with a brief note, "Fuel is life, trucks are blood." The Germans, accustomed to advances of 20 to 30 miles per day, could not imagine an enemy doubling that speed under combat conditions. According to Allied command statistics, Patton's entire Third Army had travelled over 1,000 miles in just 3 weeks, an unprecedented record in European campaign history. Meanwhile, in East Prussia, the German General Staff received reports they could not believe. On General Heinz Guderian's desk, maps were spread out showing Patton's offensive spearhead pushing past the Champagne region. A young officer murmured, "They advance 60 miles a day." Guderian frowned and replied curtly, "No mechanized force can maintain such speed. It's an exaggeration." He was the father of the Blitzkrieg doctrine and could not accept that the Americans were now doing what he had once considered impossible. However, German intelligence delivered irrefutable evidence. A Luftwaffe report dated September 5, 1944, stated that the Red Ball Express convoys moved non-stop, average speed 35 miles per hour, 24 hours a day. Aerial reconnaissance confirmed. Enemy convoys are visible along all main routes, no blackout. More astonishingly, American radio broadcasts openly transmitted their coordinates on unencrypted frequencies. According to the German intelligence department, this act demonstrated a level of confidence and response speed beyond expectation. They were moving faster than the enemy could react. Another classified report from the Western Staff Command to Berlin read, "All rules of war are inverted. We predicted they would pause, but they accelerated. They consume 10 times more, yet move twice as fast." In a meeting on September 7, 1944, Field Marshal Model admitted, "We are not fighting an army, we are fighting a machine." That statement was recorded in his post-war interrogation file as evidence of the German command's cognitive collapse. The Red Ball Express campaign achieved on-the-ground results that even the Allied High Command found astonishing. According to official records, during its 82 days of operation, the route transported 412,193 tons of goods, equivalent to 122 million ton-miles, and consumed 57 million gallons of fuel. That amount was enough to operate the entire Luftwaffe for 2 years, but every victory has a cost. Each day, around 300,000 gallons of fuel were consumed just to maintain transport, accounting for 10% of all fuel used on the Western Front. The tyre replacement system consumed 180,000 tyres, nearly equal to Germany's entire rubber output for 1944. According to the October Logistics Report, the average GMC truck lasted only 10,000 miles before complete failure. In total, 5,000 trucks were destroyed or abandoned along the roads, with an estimated cost of $100 million, equivalent to 1.6 billion in today's currency. But Eisenhower believed the cost was worth it. In a briefing held in November 1944, he said, "We spent $100 million to save half a year. According to command estimates, the Red Ball Express shortened the war in Europe by at least 6 months, reducing casualties by hundreds of thousands." Colonel Robert Little called it the most profitable waste in history. The greatest cost was not financial, it was human. According to Quartermaster Corps records, 300 drivers were killed in accidents, most due to exhaustion. They worked 20-hour days, often driving in a semi-conscious state. Driver Joseph Carter wrote in a letter to his mother, "I drive until I see the road move like water." Some drivers collapsed behind the wheel, others were injured when their trucks overturned in the night rain. Along the route, medics erected small wooden markers engraved with RBX, the symbol of the Red Ball Express. Yet in the memories of soldiers, the sound of the convoys remained a symbol of power. The engines that roared through the night became an invisible weapon the Germans could not counter. According to Wehrmacht Psychological Division documents, from mid-September 1944, several German units in the Chartres and Reims areas reported the phenomenon of ghost convoys. They heard the sound of engines and tires on pavement even when the area was completely silent. A lieutenant wrote in his diary, "We heard them even when they weren't there." That sound became a symbol of fear. To German soldiers, it meant the enemy was drawing closer, bringing with them endless resupply. While their own troops had to ration every bullet and every liter of fuel, the Americans seemed never to run out. German military psychologist Otto Becker wrote in a report to command, "The sound of trucks replaced the sound of guns as the music of defeat." In the weeks that followed, the Red Ball Express not only sustained Patton's campaign, but also paralyzed the Wehrmacht's will to resist. As the Germans retreated to their borders, they faced a cruel irony. Allied convoys now dominated the very roads they had used during the Blitzkrieg of 1940. History had turned, and this time speed had changed hands. Later, American military historians would refer to that phase as the reversal of Blitzkrieg. Patton did not win through tactics, but through energy. While the Wehrmacht was bound by principles of conservation, the Americans made excess their weapon. Every engine noise was a declaration of industrial supremacy. As Colonel Thrasher put it, every gallon of gasoline was a bullet fired into the heart of German strategy. In a 1946 documentary screening in Nuremberg, footage of the Red Ball Express thundering through the night was shown to the detained German officers. The screening room was silent, the light reflecting on stunned faces. As the engine sounds filled the space, a former Luftwaffe general whispered, "That was the sound of our defeat." The narrator's voice followed. Between August and November, 1,944, 23,000 drivers kept the Third Army alive. No one said another word. The Red Ball Express turned sound into strategy and speed into psychological warfare. The trucks rolling through the French night carried not only ammunition and fuel, but the belief that war could be shortened by human effort and industry. When Patton reached the German border, he sent a brief telegram to command, "Tell them the trucks did it." And in the silence of that night, the sound of the convoy could still be heard, like the heartbeat of a machine advancing toward victory. In the blurred black and white photographs taken in the autumn of 1944, long lines of GMC CCKW trucks cut through the night, while the faces of the drivers are rarely ever seen clearly. They were the 23,000 drivers of the Red Ball Express, most of them African Americans, segregated in logistics units under the US Army's racial policies at the time. They had no battlefield glory, wore no medals of honor, yet it was they who kept Patton's entire campaign from collapsing. According to the Quartermaster Corps report of September 1944, each driver averaged 20 hours of driving per day, covering more than 1,000 miles per week. They drove through rain, through darkness, across roads uncleared of mines, with visibility obscured by smoke and dust. A soldier named Booker T. Washington wrote in his journal, "I saw the pavement melt under the headlights and felt like I was driving into hell. These drivers often drank strong coffee or used mild stimulants to stay awake. Some drove for 3 days straight without rest." In a letter home, driver Joseph Carter wrote, "Mama, I don't carry a gun, but every gallon of gas I deliver is a bullet that helps a buddy stay alive." They were called bloodlines of Patton's army. Behind every victory, those anonymous drivers were the lifeblood that kept the army from going thirsty. Each night, more than 5,000 trucks moved at once, and any driver who slowed down could cause a backup across the entire convoy. The strict rules' 5-minute intervals, 35 miles per hour, demanded they sacrifice both sleep and health. According to the 9th Air Force report, over 300 people died during Red Ball Express operations, most due to accidents. Trucks overturned on wet roads, tires exploded, vehicles slid off slopes, or collided in the fog. Yet the morale in these units remained uniquely high. They named their trucks, painted slogans on the hoods. Hitler, here we come. Detroit to Berlin Express. Patton's Blood Bank. Amid the engine noise, they sang, whistled, cursed, and laughed loudly, as if daring fear itself. One driver wrote in his memoir, "We didn't drive for the army, we drove for our pride." In early September 1944, Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower left headquarters to inspect Red Ball Express operations in Verdun. He stood by the road, watching the endless convoy pass by, headlights reflecting on the wet pavement. In his diary, his aide, Captain Harry C. Butcher, recorded the general's words, "These men are winning the war as surely as any combat unit." That statement spread throughout the transport units. For them, it was the first time someone at the highest level acknowledged their contribution. Eisenhower repeated the statement in his report to Washington, "The Red Ball drivers are soldiers in every sense." That remark became the foundation for a major shift in U.S. military history. 4 years later, in 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order No. 9981, officially ending racial segregation in the military. Historians believe the seed of that decision began with the image of Eisenhower watching black soldiers work in the mud of France. To the French people, the Red Ball Express drivers were a symbol of liberation. Along the route from Cherbourg to Paris, French children called them les camions de la liberté, the trucks of freedom. They shared bread, chewing gum, and chocolate bars from their rations. A woman in Rhymes recalled in her memoir, "Every night we heard the trucks, and we knew the Americans were still there. That engine noise was the sound of hope." According to the French National Resistance Committee, after the Red Ball Express passed through, resistance group activity increased by 400% along the route. Many drivers secretly transported letters, medicine, and even small arms for local Maquis forces. Some were wounded when ambushed, but none abandoned their missions. To the French, the convoys brought not just goods, but dignity. They were proof that the outside world had returned to help Europe escape its long night of occupation. That impact also came from the way Americans treated civilians. Although ordered not to stop, many drivers slowed down to toss cigarettes, cookies, or sugar packets. Children ran after the trucks, cheering. A captured German officer in the Seine region stated in interrogation, "The French started to believe that America could do anything. They said, 'We saw an entire ocean running through France.' It was a psychological effect no Wehrmacht propaganda could reverse. For the Germans, the appearance of the Red Ball Express was a true psychological shock. As the convoys began to dominate major roads, German frontline soldiers realized they were facing an opponent that never seemed to tire. Prisoner Hans von Luck, a veteran panzer officer captured in September 1944, said during his interrogation in Reims, "We knew we had lost when we saw the Americans refueling like water. They filled their trucks as we filled a teapot." That statement was recorded in interrogation file number 24944, now held at the U.S. National Archives. Von Luck added, "We heard their trucks every night. The engine noise never stopped, as if the earth itself was moving." In the minds of the Germans, the endlessness of the Red Ball Express was not a strategy, it was a nightmare. Wehrmacht soldiers began to believe the Americans had infinite supplies, that they were fighting a country that could produce faster than destruction could catch up. In his words, "We didn't fear their guns. We feared their ability to start over." Those words reflect a deeper truth. The Wehrmacht collapsed not because it ran out of tanks or weapons, but because it lost faith in its own system. They saw an opponent who treated consumption as routine, while they were trapped in scarcity. German historian Franz Halder observed, "The Americans fought with waste, and their waste became power. It was a reversal of the European philosophy of war, where saving every bullet was defeated by an industry that could make millions more each day." When the war ended, many Red Ball Express drivers returned to America unknown. No medals, no parades, only memories of the 700-mile road between Cherbourg and Paris. In 1994, at the National Postal Museum in Washington, the U.S. Department of Transportation issued a commemorative stamp for the Red Ball Express. At the ceremony, elderly former drivers stood before the cameras, wearing old uniforms, shoulders trembling but eyes still bright. One of them said, "We drove for freedom, not for fame." The sound of the convoys has long faded, but their legacy endures. The Red Ball Express is not just a story of numbers or victories, but of people who turned industry into courage, who made mechanized chains a symbol of rising equality. In the dust and smoke of France in 1944, amid the roar of engines, it became clear that war is not decided by weapons alone, but by the dignity of unnamed drivers. And in that rumble of engines, history changed its color forever. In the spring of 1945, Europe fell silent after the storm. As the smoke of war gradually cleared, military historians began gathering thousands of overlooked logistics documents from forgotten archives. Among them, the Red Ball Express emerged not as a supporting campaign, but as the lifeline that kept the heart of the U.S. Army beating for 3 continuous months. The final report sent to Supreme Command in May 1945 compelled the entire military establishment to take a second look. In the compilation by the U.S. Army Service Forces, the numbers were clearly recorded. 80. 2 days of operation, a total of 412,193 tons transported, equal to 122 million ton-miles, enough to fill over 16,000 railroad cars. The system consumed 57 million gallons of fuel, wore down 180,000 tires, and led to the complete loss of 5,000 trucks. Yet that supply flow allowed General Patton to maintain unrelenting pressure on German lines, leading to the collapse of 47 Wehrmacht divisions on the Western Front. Strategic analysts estimated that the Red Ball Express shortened the war in Europe by at least 180 days, equivalent to 6 months of lives saved and hundreds of thousands who survived. Colonel Robert Little, who had commanded part of the transport route, wrote in the final report, "We didn't win by brilliance, we won by movement." Movement had become a weapon, and speed was measured in tons, not kilometers per hour. Military economist Harold Fiske remarked at the Washington Military Council, "Red Ball Express was a victory of production, not tactics." Eisenhower himself, upon reading the summary report, scribbled in the margin, "This was our bloodstream. Without it, no victory." The Germans also produced self-assessment documents. In the Nuremberg prison camp, when asked to write lessons from defeat, many German officers admitted that they had misunderstood the nature of modern war. In his memoir published in 1946, Heinz Guderian wrote, "We invented blitzkrieg, but they perfected it through logistics." He acknowledged that blitzkrieg only succeeded when supply lines held, and the Red Ball Express had shattered that limitation through industrial production. Field Marshal Walter Model, considered the hardest-nosed strategist in the Wehrmacht, left a brief note in his final report before taking his own life in April 1945. "They did not fight against us, they fought with their factories." In a Nuremberg hearing, when asked what caused the Wehrmacht's failure, he answered, "Not the courage of American troops, but their ability to replace everything we destroyed within a day." Oh, that statement laid bare the gap between two military civilizations. The Wehrmacht built its war machine on efficiency and discipline, while the Americans transformed war into an industrial chain. Where Germany polished each bullet like a crafted piece, the US produced millions a day. Where Germany designed intricate tanks, the US built 50,000 Shermans and over 500,000 GMC CCKW trucks. In that philosophy, excess was no longer a flaw, it was power. An audio recording from an Allied officers' meeting in Frankfurt in 1946 captured the words of British Colonel Harold Baxter. "The Germans fought like craftsmen, the Americans fought like manufacturers, and manufacturers always win." The detained Germans sat silently, offering no rebuttal. In that moment, the world recognized that industrial war had entered a new phase where logistics was no longer auxiliary but central to victory. After the war ended, the legacy of the Red Ball Express continued to shape America's future. Thousands of drivers left the military, bringing with them experience from managing the most complex transportation network ever created. Many became the founders of the modern logistics industry. Starting in the late 1942s, trucking companies like Yellow Freight, Roadway, and Consolidated Freightways were established by former Red Ball drivers. They applied the same principles that had won the war for Patton: continuous rotation, standardized vehicles, and 24-hour operations. Those principles became the foundation for the future U.S. interstate highway system. In 1956, when President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, he told the press, "I learned on the roads of France that a nation's strength is measured by its roads." It was his way of paying tribute to the paths once paved by the Red Ball Express. From Cherbourg to Chartres, from Le Mans to Paris, those routes did not just connect armies, they laid the groundwork for the 20th century's global supply network. But the legacy of the Red Ball Express went beyond industry. It also became a legacy of equity. The contributions of black drivers during the campaign became proof of equal ability in serving the nation. When the U.S. military enacted desegregation policies in 1948, military journalists cited the Red Ball Express as a prime example. Historian Richard Carter wrote in Military Review, "They carried not just fuel, but the proof that democracy can drive itself forward." While America remembered the Red Ball Express as a symbol of efficiency, the Germans saw it as a lesson in humility. In 1950, in his book Erinnerungen eines Soldaten, Guderian added, "We did not lose for lack of courage, but because we failed to understand that in the industrial age, speed of production is a form of victory." Other German officers shared this view. General Friedrich Schulz described the Red Ball Express as a mobile civilization, a temporary nation on wheels. At a military seminar in Bonn in 1953, a young Bundeswehr officer asked, "Can Blitzkrieg be recreated?" Former General Heinz Eberbach replied, "Blitzkrieg is not dead, but it needs factories to live. The Americans understood that. We did not." The room fell silent. That admission marked a turning point in European military thinking. when logistics was redefined as the art of speed, no longer a subordinate part of strategy. Half a century later, military academies still teach the Red Ball Express as a textbook case of logistics as strategy. Analysts compare it with modern campaigns from the Persian Gulf to Iraq, where the US continues to follow principles forged in 1944. Mass over precision, speed over finesse, and supply chains as the second front. General Albert Kesselring, during post-war interrogation, gave a short statement that history would not forget. We prepared for tanks and planes, but no one prepared for 6,000 trucks. Looking at a photo of the dense Red Ball Express convoys on the roads of Normandy, he added, "They beat us with engines, not with bullets." That confession marked the end of an era, the age of lean warfare, giving way to the age of industrial conflict. The Red Ball Express not only proved the power of logistics, it redefined the meaning of victory. In the industrial age, war is no longer measured by troop numbers, but by the ability to move, resupply, and recover. A nation may lose a battle, but if it maintains its supply lines, it still has a chance. And America, in 82 days of Red Ball Express operations, proved that supply speed mattered more than rate of fire. Along the old roads of France, one can still see faded tire marks etched into the pavement by time. Each worn groove is a memory of an era when logistics became the decisive weapon. In today's military seminars, when generals speak of modern warfare, the Red Ball Express remains the opening image, an endless line of trucks linking Cherbourg to victory, carrying the 20th century's message that in war, whoever controls the supply line controls the future.